The first ancestors were fleeing the lion when they came to this valley. They would have fled further south had the river not stood on their path. Afraid to cross the dangerous water before them, here the tribe was forced to make their stand. And so they built this stronghold to defend themselves from the lion. Soon enough, their children learned to harness fire and stone to forge their own iron claws, which they took to the hunting field and finally defeated the lion. And there the age of the warrior was born. The warrior seized the lion's chair at last and put on the crown of the jungle. But little did the warrior perceive that victory did not come without its prize. For when one sits on the lion's chair long enough, soon they become the lion and start eating from their own pride. And so the hunt begins again. One day, a brave lioness came to the banks and asked the Ingwenya to ferry her surviving cubs across the water, that they may wait in exile on the other shore. "Go well, blood of my blood," she vowed before the river. "May your claws grow longer than your father's, that he may hear you roar across the water and know you have returned home to avenge your brothers with iron and blood." Moungi walked along the fence wall of his father's stronghold. And not for the first time did he feel like a vagabond or a wolf skulking about the ancient perimeter while everyone was asleep on the other side of it. It was constructed of thousands of wood posts, firmly erect upright, as if they were tree trunks that long stemmed from the very earth, not man-made. Each log was thick and at least over 4 meters tall, but turned to a spike at the top end, each a little higher or lower from the one next to it. They all formed a winding jigsaw in the sky that separated home from the wild river valley of Muima. A few posts featured an old skull find between, a relic from the head of an enemy, probably a cattle thief long impaled and charged to stand guard the stronghold he once preyed upon. But the rest of the wall marched on until it was broken by towers of ivory at the gate entrances, a pair of giant elephant tusks, gifts from the great Klo queens, Indlovukazi esezakhothama, who no longer walk on the face of Lesira. Their ancient tusks still stand bright and strong, curved and twisted to form a great arch at all 3 gates to the stronghold, the gate of refuge to the north, the gate of arms on the south, and the gate of the great kraal, which is the one Moungi just used to exit the stronghold of his father. Traitor sounds more fitting than vagabond or wolf, he thought, wondering what other things the wall has been keeping out since it rose from the ground many years ago. If it could keep traitors from escaping, as good as it is at keeping enemies out, then there would be no hope for me at all. Moungi heard himself mutter, as if the wall was an old friend standing on guard duty, one whom he should apologize to. It is not the wall, but the man that keep the enemy at bay. His father would have corrected if he had him now. Yes, the Kgosi Nongo Tongiserogi had taught all his 5 sons to love above everything else what the wall circumvented. Abapansi, family, and Isibaya Soyihlo, the great kraal of his people. It matters not what kind they are. Everything and everyone on the other side of our wall is an enemy. Moungi remembers the exact words the Kgosi taught him and his brothers to live by. For Nongo had ensured the words are rooted so deep inside each of them, as if he had foreseen the evil paths that awaited to draw some of his sons away from home one day. Not rooted deep enough when it comes to this one, I suppose. Moungi realized, reminded that he was not born at Guabeleto like the rest of his brothers, but at the riverbanks where his mother Nonyezo left him among the reeds as a newborn. Baba should have left me there to die, as the elders had advised him to. Perhaps they had foreseen that my coming would invite the enemy home one day. Yes, wolves and vagabonds and cattle thieves were not the worst the wall was protecting his people from. The people of the other tribe were. The house of Uma-Undar on the other side of the Langa river. That's whom Nongo had really meant by enemy. And here Moungi was, taking one heavy footstep after another, on his way to make love to one of their daughters. It has been a shady business, all of it. From the first morning, Moungi stepped back on his father's stronghold after he'd been with her. He would spend all day gnawing on his guilt, afraid of the shame he was about to bring on his family. But when the sun went behind the mountains, his feet ached just as his heart ached, aching for his lover on the other side. Like night approaches on the bright world of a dying day and devours its colors under a blanket of gray, so his feet carried him through the gates, and his heart ferried him across the water. It had to be at midnight, when all the world had gone to sleep, and when Langa was calm enough to be tamed by the spell of their love-making. It was her lullaby, the song that erased all memory of iron, fire, and blood down the river. For iron, fire, and blood was all the two clan houses have dealt each other for many, many years. But when one day two lonely souls stood on either end of her waters and gazed at one another at first sight, here was a different affair than any that old dear Langa had ever seen. Here was love, born against all the hate and cruelty that has haunted this valley for many generations of men and women. For as long as time can remember, the only thing that brought a Tongi Serogi and an Uma-Undar together was war, not love. This was Nongo's reply when Moungi finally confessed to him about his evening visits to the riverbanks. For the next few days, Moungi couldn't get anything else out of him, not a morning's greeting, nor an evening's farewell. It seemed his father was having a difficult time since then, and couldn't look at him, like every elder in the stronghold warned, when they learned that Moungi broke the sacred blood oath that prohibited the two sides of the river from ever reconciling. What made the two sides hate each other's guts so much? Again Moungi wondered to himself for the 100th time, feeling each step he took south towards the riverbanks a hammer fall against the very ground his ancestors slept. It was this question that led him to approach his father in the first place. Once he had asked it, Kgosi Nongo knew right away that his son had made some contact with the enemy. "You disappoint me, Ndodana, after all you have been taught since the day you entered Esibayeni." I should not have come to him. Sikho regretted now, feeling a cold breeze butter his bare back all the way from the Muikawa, where his father sat among the other elders. I should have kept it all to myself and just... Suddenly he paused, jumping from one voice in his head to another. "And just what? Go on your merry way to make love to the daughter of Ninua Uma-Undar in the reeds?" The voices in his head have been warring each other since Moungi met Ninua Uma-Undar at the river. So loud they were, he could tell which corner of his mind each was coming from. He could just give them names as if they were fairy companions who were present everywhere he went. The sage voice, the lamenting voice, and the warmonger. The sage voice wore all the wisdom of the elders and warned Moungi of things to come if he continued with the path he was on. Iron and fire and blood down the river, just like it was before the river treaty was drawn. The sage voice said. "So what if you heed the elders and turn back with your tail between your legs?" countered back the warmonger voice, saying, "War is coming, regardless which course you take or don't. The wall won't need to resist any foe on the outside at all, for the enemy is from within this time around. A war between brothers." Yes, so far the warmonger was right by the look of things. War was brewing in the house of Tongi Serogi, and the Uma-Undars on the other side of the river had nothing to do with it. Well, until Mumundi decided to drag their name in when he learned Moungi picked one of their flowers at the riverbanks. "A sideshow," the warmonger said to him now. "The real show is the one between him and Dingo, and he is using this as another opportunity to display strength and resolve in the eyes of the elders." Yes, Mumundi's intentions to sit the Tlogotlalo were now obvious to everyone in the stronghold. Just last winter, Mumundi dropped the first spit on Dingo's prospects as a leader when he defeated Nianini at the Great Kraal on a very cold Hoana's morning. "How did it fall on my duties to hold Nianini to account before their ancestors, and not on the responsibilities of the eldest brother amongst us?" Mumundi cried at the audience as they acknowledged his victory, the body of Nianini lying in a pool of blood beneath his feet. That was the moment he began his tune to the elders as the most favorable successor to the Tlogotlalo, not Dingo. Well, he's about to play that tune again when you meet him Esibayeni, said the lamenting voice, picturing Moungi lying dead on the crowd cow dung floor like Nianini met his fate last winter. Think about that first before you take the next step. Every step from here on leads to battle one way or another, again disputed the warmonger voice. If you don't answer Mumundi's challenger now as your brother, you will answer him as your Khosi should he win the lion's chair over Dingo. And what if you answer him and emerge victorious? Asked the sage voice. Even if Mumundi was out of the picture, the elder council would still not approve your intent to wed the enemy's daughter. Your father or Dingo after him and the rest of your brothers would never cast the elders aside for your heart's sake. Then why not take the lion's chair yourself? Again the warmonger voice said, urging Moungi to take another step further south. If it is the lion's chair that stands between you and the woman you want, why not seize it and make the rules yourself? Moungi had never dreamed of himself sitting on the throne of his father before. What the warmonger voice was really telling him was that he would need to raise an army of his own spears in defiance of the rules his forefathers threw at the river to prohibit any future union between a Tongiserogi and an Uma-Undar. He would need to conquer his brothers, succeed Nongo on the lion's chair, and overrule all the elders in the Multawa. A very costly, bright prize, son of Nongo. Spilling the blood of your brothers and dishonoring the name of your ancestors, all of it just to wed the enemy. Is Ninua Uma-Undar worth that much? Pointed out the sage voice. He wouldn't be the first warrior to start an entire war for a woman. Govuzane Siromihua buried his 8 brothers for the hand of Nothemba Ndlovu. Even the 3 brother kings put up their scepter kingdoms for the hand of Funwa Dungulilu, who was our very own daughter of the soil. The greatest empire on the west of the world, and with the blink of Funwa's beautiful eyes, the scepter kingdoms fell back to the ground, said the sage voice. Govuzane's kinslaying, though, rings close to home than the food of the 3 scepter kings, drew in the lamenter. Govuzane turned mad after killing his brothers and went on to put Nothemba on the lion's chair itself. Then the ancestors turned their back, and the stronghold was plunged into a famine that lasted for 8 years. 8 years for 8 brothers. A very hefty price for a woman. Some say it was Musehane Siromihua, the brother who survived Govuzane's murdering spree, who took the ancestors with him when he escaped to make his new home in the far north, the warmonger added. Musahane's part in that tale comes after the fact, just like the rise of the 7 priests follows after the fall of the 3 brother kings, contended the sage voice. Both are well-known cautionary tales home and away. For little did Govuzane know the curses he will receive from the hand he was asking in Nothemba. And blind were the 3 brother kings as they fought each other for the hand of Funwa. Who knows what lies in Ninua's hand that you are so eager to disregard the elders for your selfish desires, Moungi? Moungi's feet had not been idle while he suffered the voices in his head. Soon he had finished rounding the wall and was now approaching the main yard before the gate of arms, facing away to the river banks. He was coming from the west, careful not to come close enough to alert the man who stood watch every shadow that maneuvered near the gate. Of old, many have died here, killed before they could announce their presence before the house of Tongiserogi. And for Moungi Tongiserogi, coming from the inside this time of the night was as dangerous as approaching from the outside. Again he remembers the first night he left the stronghold in secret, the only time he used the gate of arms for the same purpose. That night the warriors were stationed with Mpondo Zigaboye and Zinyolinde, the two hellhounds of Shobala the Tokoloshi. They are the real keepers of the gate, thought Moungi now, remembering how the horns woke everyone in the stronghold that late evening. "A cattle thief!" they called. "We already have the Tokoloshe to catch other cattle thieves," others answered. "A goat smuggler then? A burglar? Or a silent killer?" others suspected. Whoever it was, the house would not go back to sleep until he was found. Well, he was never found, and only Moungi, Mpondo Zigaboye and Zinyolinde knew that the culprit had not penetrated in but escaped the opposite direction. If only a dog's eye could tell the things it sees while their masters sleep, thought Moungi, smiling in the dark. If I were to be caught, it would have to be that evening and no other. And so he turned his back on his father's stronghold. Between him and the river stood the slopes down to the banks, a sea of reeds about 3 meters high into the air. Now at night they were a black wall, and as he vanished through them, he was greeted by a breeze that smelled of freshly springs and river rock, the first scents that welcomed him to the world 20 years ago. Countless paths wound through the reeds, making a maze of passages, at times intertwining, at times completely isolated and bewildering to the unsuspecting eye, but led one to different places along the banks of Langa. Moungi's path was a secret. After he met her, he made a new trail through the reeds, one that no one else would recognize and trace in order to find the nest where he made love to the enemy's daughter. I wonder if she goes through the same trouble as I do, Moungi suddenly thought. He has never asked her, nor stayed with her long enough to ask her about her family. What's there to ask? Everything about our families is in the past, and the past does not matter. Soon he sifted through the last reeds before the edge, and did not realize he was then knee-deep in the water. The further he went, the higher the reeds towered above him, arching as they gently opened the path before him. His path was not dark anymore, for there were lilies on the water, lilies that flowered with lights like candles in the river. Below, one could see a cool glow like starlight through the clear water, coming from stones and pearls that lay on the riverbed that would have been worth more than treasure hoards of great kings beyond the seas. Yes, beneath Langa's waters lay a few great secrets, secrets only seers and healers and the wisest among the Bahura people the knowledge of was bestowed. This part of the river bank was one of them, and those who had knowledge of these river stones knew it served no use to pick any of them out of the water, unless one was especially granted by Langa herself. And the few stones that have ever been granted couldn't be passed on, nor traded to wandering merchants on the roads to and fro the old stone cities. For the light of these stones was a living one, which only kept their glow so long as they were in the hand of the one who received from Langa River. I came for the only pearl I could ever desire. Moungi reflected on his way. Yes, that you did, replied the sage voice in his head, laughing. But will the river allow you to take this pearl of yours home? And what will your people say of it? I do wonder. Moungi had already left his mind by the end of that question. He had arrived before a glade that opened away from the reeds, which further to its other end the river rushed across from him with easterly-westerly currents under a grey mist. It was in this mist that Moungi first heard her, on a morning last summer after the rain. Yes, it was her voice that led her to this secret place. And when he had come so close to it, Here he could go no further, but waited and waited for the mist to clear before her song stopped. Her song did stop, but the mist remained throughout the day. That evening, Moungi came home with an empty chest. He did not sleep, but stared at the roof of the lower all night, hearing the voice of the young woman back in the mists. The following morning was the same, and the next morning, and the one after it, until Moungi decided to learn the tune of the strange woman and reply to it with a message of his own. And when she, after a thoughtful pause and a breath of fear, sang back to his words, there was born their song that would lift the mists and tame Langa's waters to allow them to meet. And the rest, as they shall hereafter say, is history. Moungi smiled in the dark, listening in anticipation. Time stood still, and everything in it. The night held its breath, and Langa's waters passed quietly, waiting in anticipation too. Somewhere in the mists, Moungi knew a pair of eyes was looking for him from the other side. And soon just then, out of the shadows, a soft melody called from across the water. A lonely voice humming in the darkness. Langa, Langa, I am the voice of your grandchild. Father named me Ninua the fair and kind. Mother bore me and gave to the land a daughter. The house tests, I come to fetch water. My beloved. Moungi jumped on his chest, ready to answer and receive back his heart. Then lowly, with a deeper tone of the same tune, he picked his voice and breathed, and words came from him and went to the other side. The house of Nongo stood upright. From the river comes the sun before the light, and when the sun goes at dusk, the river calls home he must. A soft wind passed by, waking the shadows with a gently touch as it went. The reeds seemed to dance back and forth. Moungi's voice was followed by the singer again, womanly and tender. The sky was gold, the night was gone. Upon the rocky banks I stand alone. I knelt and sang and hailed to you and filled my empty drum anew. Her voice went, and slowly the mist and the dark were clearing, as if the light of the stars had descended. Far away in the world the night hung and loomed, but here it became neither young nor old. When the stars still soared up high, before the wolf returns and dawn is nigh, by the river he stands and thoughts he heeds, until the morning dews grow on the reeds. Moungi sang on. He could almost see her, his breath already gone from him, to meet her on the other side. Her voice joined again and rang. I sang, I thanked, I asked for nothing more. My eyes cleared and looked ashore. Beyond where my feet never tread on land, a man stands, to me wove a hand. And again Moungi picked his voice and sang. Dawn is here with a golden glance, and the reeds began to dance. The river calls my name and sings, behold the sight she brings. And her voice returned and sang. Never again the world was fair, no moon or star was so. His heart lies in the bottom floor, in cold depths among the river stones. And again Moungi sang, this time with her. Their voices joined. Langa, Langa, you no man can tame. I long to meet and tell my name, and drink in the mires of your spring, on the river banks where my lover sings. By the time their chanting had stopped, a shoal had swelled across the water, and the river lay on either side of it. It was as if a path had opened, and a bridge made of fine sands and shining pearls had spun between the two shores. From the other side, Moungi could see his lover now halfway, coming to meet him. "Ninua," his eyes exclaimed. "No woman looked so fair on the Isle of Dreams." They met and embraced, and the twilight of the stars shone on the river like a dream that becomes alive. It was a night the night itself longed for, a bond that was mourned by many years of bloodshed between a people of two river shores. For it was doomed love, a Dongi Sarochi and an Uma-Undar. Love was made and fate unmade. Moungi looked inside her eyes, and in that moment the voices in his head were like cries sunken underwater. "Ninua is the second daughter of the house of Uma-Undar," the sage voice returned with a host of others which it had called from the grave to one Moungi. "She is the enemy of your father and his fathers before him." "No," he heard a deeper and much more convicted single voice inside his head say. It could have been the warmonger's voice, kindled in the depths of his chest, that were ready to warm Ninua when she falls between his arms. No amount of wisdom could outstand the beauty in Ninua's eyes, no glory crowned like her touch, no victory tasted like her lips. Moungi would die embalmed in her breasts, which no grave was sweeter. If his lust was as cold and overwhelming as the river water at night, by day his love burned like the sun, consuming his world with an eternal flame. For Ninua Uma-Undar's beauty was unsurpassed in the valley, the river daughter of her generation, like Nonyeza, Moungi's mother was in her day, who left Moungi on these very waters 20 years ago.